name is Alberto Olivas. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event. And I'm wearing two hats tonight. I'm both talking to you as Executive Director of the Congressman Ed Pastor Center for Politics and Public Service at ASU. Our center is new, established through a gift made by the retired Congressman Ed Pastor for the purpose of teaching students the skills for effective political and electoral engagement. So we're doing all kinds of things, really fascinating work with students on giving them the skills to do work to educate their peers on elections issues, to get them registered to vote and turned out. But beyond that, the skills to engage effectively with political leaders and community leaders to be advocates for the issues that they care about. I'm also here as a representative of Valley Leadership. Unfortunately, our executive director could not be with us tonight, but Valley Leadership is one of the other sponsors for tonight's event. I'm recently stepped down from the board of directors after serving for 6 years for Valley Leadership, class of 2000, class 22, woohoo. And we have several Valley Leadership board members and class members in attendance today as well. And thirdly, we're very, very grateful for the partnership with the Arizona Republic to help us promote this event and get community members informed about the issues related to this particular proposition. Now, my third hat is as a kind of long-time voting advocate and elections wonk, going back to when I was a voter outreach director for Secretary of State Betsy Bayless way back in 1998. And one of the things that we know about the research on what makes a difference with voting is how much voters know about what's on the ballot. So when we ask people, especially young people, why people don't vote, they often get it wrong. They say people don't vote because they don't care, because they're cynical and apathetic. And while those things contribute to low voting, the main issue really comes down to information. If people don't know how to vote, if they don't know what the process involves, but more fundamentally, if they don't know what's on the ballot and how it affects them, they're not going to turn out. So events like tonight and the coverage made possible through our media partners are really critical so that people can understand what's at stake for them and why they should be paying attention and participating. In that, guys, I'd like to start our event by showing you a quick video that some students I work with put together on this proposition. We worked with Masters of Fine Arts students in the Herberger School of Performing Arts and gave them the challenge, an artistic challenge. How can you talk about Prop 205 in a way that is interesting and engaging for people that are not into politics, and that does a fair job of presenting the arguments on both sides of this issue? I think they did an incredible job, and I'd like to use this video to set up our conversation before I introduce our moderator and our excellent panelists tonight. So let me ask you to divert your attention to the screen while I show you their work and ask you to decide for yourself if you think they did a good job.
Arizona Proposition 205, Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana.
Woohoo!
I know how I'm voting.
Wait a second. Before we make any decision, let's take a look to some of the arguments.
The taxation of marijuana would provide large sources of revenue for Arizona's education and drug reform programs.
For the children.
Marijuana edibles target children. Legalization will decrease the power of cartels.
Numbers are way down, boss. Now that we're competing with those legal dispensaries.
Looks like we're going to have to go straight.
Taxation and regulation has ruined another outpost of laissez-faire capitalism. Is it too late to start a bank? Some argue that the cost from increased marijuana-related accidents and emergency room visits would outweigh the new tax revenue.
No more money.
For the children.
Marijuana is still illegal at the federal level.
20, 40, 60, 80, 400. All right. Please take this out back and deposit into the bank of under my mattress.
Legalization still allows for employers to restrict and test for marijuana use by its employees.
Sorry, Jim, but you tested positive. Despite legalization, marijuana use is still prohibited at Dinosaur Corporate.
Studies show that around 1 out of 10 marijuana users become addicted, and many experience withdrawal symptoms like irritability, depression, and anxiety.
Brian? 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 You've got a problem.
Yeah, I know.
Arizona Proposition 205, Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana. A yes vote permits individuals 21 years and older to privately use, possess, manufacture, or give away up to 1 ounce of marijuana. A no vote will retain existing law which prohibits individuals from using, possessing, growing, or purchasing marijuana. An informed decision is a good decision.
So that's our student video. What do you think? Thank you for your attention. I'd like to, again, thank you for participating tonight. And one of the things I want to point out to you is that later in tonight's event, we will be asking for questions from the audience submitted via cards. So if you didn't see them at the front table, there are little index cards you can use to write down your questions. And we'll be collecting those and handing them to our moderator, who will be selecting from your questions to pose to the panelists that we have tonight. It's now my pleasure to turn this event over to our very esteemed moderator. Rebecca Sanders is senior political reporter for the Arizona Republic and ArizonaCentral.com. Rebecca.
Thank you. How's that volume? Is that all right? Well, thank you all so much for joining us for a really important discussion, and I'd like to just emphasize these great sponsors, and that the Arizona Republic is also a sponsor and wants to be a part of educating our community to make good decisions this election, and also to provide a space that's respectful and seeks dialogue rather than fights and arguments. So we're going to try to bring that spirit tonight. And I'll introduce our panelists. Are you going to do the Skype?
Yes.
Okay. We've got J.P. Holyoke here in front on the left. He's president of the Arizona Dispensary Association and chairman of the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. He also runs the Scottsdale-based investment advisory firm Holyoke Wealth Management and is the owner of Arizona Natural Selections, a medical marijuana dispensary. On our right, we've got Bill Montgomery, who is the Maricopa County Attorney. He was elected in 2010, re-elected in 2012, and is seeking a third term this year. He is a West Point graduate and former deputy county attorney and a professional prosecutor. And joining us via Skype from Denver is Ashley Ray Kilroy. She's executive director of marijuana policy for the Denver Mayor's Office. Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
And she has worked as an attorney, mediator, and investigator. In government, she has served as deputy manager of the Department of Safety, senior city attorney for the city and county of Denver, deputy general counsel for Denver Public Schools, and assistant county attorney for Washington County. This will not be a strict debate, but a discussion in which we hope to explain the best arguments on both sides and why this issue matters to our panelists as well as to you. And we're hoping to leave you with a greater understanding of the pros and cons to make an informed decision at the ballot box. We will take questions at the end, so feel free to fill out those cards and we'll collect them later on. And we'll move on. So let's say to the panelists, just please keep your answers succinct, and we'll keep that conversation going so that everyone has a good chance to respond. To start off, thank you for that video, which did read some of the ballot language, but I think it's just helpful for us all to start from that starting point and read the ballot language all the way through. So let's start with that. So Proposition 205 says, a yes vote shall have the effect of permitting individuals 21 years and older to privately use, possess, manufacture, give away, or transport up to 1 ounce of marijuana and grow up to 6 marijuana plants at the individual's residence. It generally declares violations of the Act, including public use, a petty offense, punishable by no more than a $300 fine. It creates the Department of Marijuana Licenses and Control, which includes a 7-member marijuana commission appointed by the governor to regulate and license entities involved in cultivating, manufacturing, distributing, selling, and testing marijuana products. It establishes licensing fees for marijuana establishments and levies a 15% tax on all marijuana and marijuana products. It declares all marijuana establishment contracts enforceable, notwithstanding any conflict with federal law. A no vote shall have the effect of retaining existing law, which prohibits individuals from using, possessing, growing, or purchasing marijuana unless the individual is authorized by and doing so in compliance with the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act. And just to be clear, I'm sure we all know, but we're talking about recreational marijuana here. We already have medical marijuana legalized in the state. So let's go to Ashley. She's going to tell us a little bit about what she has experienced as basically a special advisor to Denver city government on this subject of recreational marijuana legalization. So Ashley, will you just lay out, for 2 years it has been legal. What have you faced in the city of Denver and the state of Colorado? What has your experience been with this new paradigm?
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here, even though I'm just here sort of in spirit, remotely from Denver. I'm in the City and County building right now in Denver. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
you
good.
know that you look really big.
I look really big? Okay, how's this? Is that better? So, well, what I'll do, I'll tell you a little bit about what happened in Colorado. We have Amendment 64 is our retail marijuana amendment. It passed in November of 2012, just like you guys are looking at it right now, and looking at November of 2016. We had medical marijuana, had been legal since 2000. So we've had medical marijuana for over 16 years. Retail marijuana passed November 2012 with full implementation by the following year, January 1st, 2014. So you all will have, if it passes in your jurisdiction in Arizona, you'll have a couple more months than we had to implement it. In Colorado, we had 4 types of licenses. We have licenses to grow, licenses to sell, licenses to manufacture infused products, so making tonics, tinctures, edibles, and food, and testing facilities. And I know you all, in your initiative, you have an additional license, I think, for a distributor model, and we don't have the distributor model. So right away it passed in Denver, in the state of Colorado by about 55% of the voters, but in Denver it passed by about 65% of the voters. So our mayor and our city council felt like we definitely had a mandate to implement this, and our mayor's direction was, we're doing it, and we're going to implement it. We're going to implement it effectively. We're going to put the resources to it, to do it and do it right. Our other goal is that while we're implementing, that we are ensuring that we're balancing all the other needs and wants in our communities, that we're listening to our neighbors, we're protecting our quality of life, we're keeping a close eye on youth usage, we're monitoring crime rates, we're keeping an eye on DUIDs. So we're implementing this will of the voters, but also ensuring we're trying to keep a handle on everything else. And as you probably know, it's moving quickly, and in order to do that has been a challenge. We've been working really hard. We are committed to doing the best job we can, being appropriately staffed, but monitoring outcomes and tracking and changing and making adjustments where necessary. And there have definitely been some areas where we've had to change or backtrack, or where we've had to add additional local rules or local regulations or local policies in place so that we can get this right. So really, I'm not here to advocate one way or the other for or against legalization, but just here to provide you with one city's experience in legalizing marijuana. I'm happy to talk more, and I can tell you about how we've managed it. I can talk about how we're paying for it. I can talk about the impacts.
Right. So Ms. Kilroy, will you talk about the pros and cons that you have discovered and what we know from data so far?
Right. So that is a great question. That's what everybody wants to know, because as everybody's looking at this, all these other states and jurisdictions, you are asking, what is this going to mean for my community? And that is one thing, one thing that's really key for us, making sure we're keeping an eye on that. The problem is the data piece. I have on my small team, I have a full-time data analyst and business process person, and the state has hired a person who his only job is to track marijuana-related data. But the problem that we're finding in getting this information and measuring these impacts is we don't have great baseline data. So before legalization, our officers were ticketing for driving under the influence of drugs, DUID, as opposed to DUIs. They were ticketing for DUIDs, but we weren't teasing out the marijuana DUIDs. Our schools were tracking their different types of suspensions, including drug-related suspensions, but they weren't teasing out marijuana-related school-based suspensions. Some of our hospitals, they were tracking alcohol-related admissions, but they weren't tracking marijuana-related admissions. So we're first starting with data where we didn't have the data to begin with. And then now we've got a high level of focus on it, right? Because we know the world is watching. We want to make sure we're doing this right. We want to know what the impacts of legalization are. So on our police department, we trained a bunch of drug enforcement recognition experts. So we have a bunch of DREs on board now, not as many as we had before. We have taught at the hospitals, we've taught staff how to properly code marijuana-related hospital admissions. And as I understand, the schools are now starting to kind of tease out those marijuana-related admissions.
And so some of the concerns that we've heard are about youth use of marijuana, has that increased or not, about the driving under the influence, what kind of effects that you've seen in that area, and also about taxation and funding that you've gotten from the sale. Can you address those?
People will interpret this data differently, but our state data analyst who looks at this and my data analyst who looks at this are clear and convinced that youth usage in Colorado has basically been flat for almost 20 years. And we're surprised by that. Let me also say youth usage in Colorado, we've always been number 1 or 2 for 20 years. It has remained flat since before and after legalization. Now, we didn't expect that. We have seen some other indicators indicate to us that we would think youth usage would have been going up. For example, we saw that the youth perception and risk for 12 to 17-year-olds in marijuana has really decreased greatly. We also know that in Denver right now, we have a lot of marijuana outlets, and we know that with alcohol and tobacco, a lot of times outlet density will correlate to youth usage. We have a commercialized market. There's people advertising for marijuana. We would have expected to see youth usage go up, but we haven't seen it yet. We're happy. We've put a lot of money and effort towards youth education and youth prevention. We're hoping that has had some impact. It still also might be that whole piece that it's still too new. Maybe the data's lagging, or maybe the kids aren't comfortable telling, it's a self-reporting survey, so we're not exactly sure what it means, but from our long-term data, it is showing that youth usage has remained stable since legalization.
And what about things like arrests, driving under the influence, the public safety issues?
Yep. Arrest crime also again has remained relatively flat. Marijuana-related crime in Denver has always been about 2% of our overall crime, with larceny being about 30%, theft from motor vehicles being about 15%, auto theft maybe another 15 or something like that. So marijuana-related crime has been about 2% of our overall crime, both before legalization and after legalization. But anecdotally, we are hearing that there's a lot more weed out there. There's a lot of other action going on out there. That the feds are seeing, Colorado marijuana crossing state lines. We do know from our data, yes, our arrests have remained very much the same, but we have seen an increase in the amount that we've seized. So when we have been making those arrests, maybe before we were arresting or pulling over someone and they had a pound of weed in their car, now when we're making arrests, we're going into illegal grows that now have the ability to hide in plain sight, and we're going in and there's maybe 2,000 plants. So even though the level of crime has stayed the same, there have been more significant crimes with higher amounts of marijuana.
And what about costs and revenue? So you've been collecting some revenue from this, but also you've had to hire more staff and deal with more regulations. So can you address those?
So everybody hears about that there's a lot of money in Colorado because of legalization. I think it's really important for everyone to understand, and it's true, marijuana is on track to be $1 billion industry in Colorado this year. But Colorado's GDP is $330 billion, so that marijuana industry is about 1/3 of 1% of Colorado's GDP. Now, narrowing that down to Denver, that we tax marijuana sales, retail marijuana sales at about 21%. And that marijuana revenue that we get from retail sales, from medical sales, from licensing fees and renewal fees and all that type of stuff, that comes into about 2.3% of our general fund revenue. So that's significant, but it's not huge, right? This year, it looks like that money is on track to be about 30 million, not 30 billion, 30 million in Denver. And the majority of the regular sales tax goes into the general fund, just like everything else, to pay for everything else, just like taxes on a new vehicle light or taxes on whatever else you pay, goes into our general fund to pay for our regular expenses. We have a special 3.5% sales tax, which amounts to about 1/3 of that. And that special 3.5% sales tax about this year will be about $9 million. That amount we have, it's still in the general fund, but we have it soft dedicated to cover really what we've designated as regulation, enforcement, and youth education, youth prevention and youth education. So that $9 million has been divided sort of in those 3 buckets. We have hired an additional almost 55 or more employees to regulate marijuana. We also have, with the youth usage, we have about $3 million in grants out in the community to help teach youth about marijuana and marijuana usage and how to make healthy decisions. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but...
And then can you go over a little bit more the differences between the Colorado law and the Arizona law, and what advice you have for voters here to be considering, what they really need to be paying the most attention to as they make their decision?
Okay. Yes, I've read your initiative, and it is very similar to the Colorado Amendment 64. I think we had the same proponents that you guys did or do. The Marijuana Policy Project also was one of the major proponents of the initiative in Colorado. So a lot of the language is the same, but there are definitely some differences. So I guess kind of one of the ones that really stands out to me, and I don't know actually how it will play out or how it will look for you, is how you have it set up to regulate marijuana. This initiative provides for a commission and the Department of Marijuana Licenses and Control. And so I guess you have an executive director, and then you'll have a commission of 7 people, with 3 of them industry representatives. in Colorado at our state level. I mean, we're not set up at all like a commission, both at the state and the city level. It's set up just like a regular office or a regular agency. At the state level, we have the Marijuana Enforcement Division that reports to the Department of Revenue, and the head of the Department of Revenue is a cabinet member who reports directly to the governor. Here in the city, we have the Office of Marijuana Policy. I'm the executive director of the Office of Marijuana Policy, and I report to the mayor. So yours is very different, having that commission piece. Similarities, I mean, the sort of basic tenets that it is, providing that adults over 21 can possess up to an ounce of marijuana. We have that as well. We also have what we call sort of private non-commercial growing, private non-commercial cultivation by individuals of up to 6 plants, and you have that in this initiative. And then you also have the commercial growing, the regulate like alcohol, and we have that piece as well. I've seen in looking at your initiatives that some of the stuff around the sort of the private growing, they've taken a couple of things, some of the lessons learned, I think, from Colorado, and have put them in your initiative. We did not have anything about limiting the number of plants per household. You all have that in there now. You say no more than 12 plants per household. We had to do that by a local rule. We also, by local rule, had to put in, we banned home hash oil extraction. I see you've got some of that in there. So there's a couple of things here where they, hopefully I think they've taken some things that would benefit safety and have put those in there. With regard to the commercial side of the house, the commercial regulated market, you guys have an effective cap by saying only, the currently existing medical marijuana businesses can convert to retail. We did not have that in Amendment 64. Our mayor did recommend that to City Council for the first 2 years. So for the first 2 years, we had that type of cap, built-in cap, effective cap, by saying only currently existing medical marijuana businesses could convert.
Okay, well,
But
those are a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, a difference I see with you all, though, we said, our amendment said that local jurisdictions could opt out entirely, and yours say they could opt out, but I might not be getting this right. I think it says they can opt out, but not if they're already currently existing medical marijuana businesses. If there's already a currently medical, they can convert. And we said, if the jurisdictions opted out, they opted out, and they just kept their medical. They did not get to convert or add retail.
Well, that's a big difference. All right, great. Thank you so much, Ashley. And we're going to keep you on the line there. So if we're talking about a subject that you would like to add your thoughts on, I can definitely come to you. Let us know.
Okay.
So we're going to go to our panelists, JP Holyoke and Bill Montgomery now. And we're going to ask a few questions. But first, let's start with kind of your personal story. Because I've seen a variety of these debates, and both of you are very passionate about your side. And I'd like to know where that passion comes from. Can you, in 2 or 3 minutes, tell us what experience you've had that has reinforced or created this view for you about this issue? So let's start with Mr. Holyoke. Can you tell us about your personal motivation here?
First, it sounds like I can hear myself. Can you all hear me as well? Good, thank you. I wish that, oh good, the photo's back up. I had a lot more hair back then. And so now it's pretty shiny, and I'm pretty sure it's glaring off of the camera light there too as well. I don't look like the guy that you kind of expect to be the advocate for marijuana in this case. I actually dress like this most of the time. I shower most days, and I've never actually worn patchouli oil. So I came to this as a conservative Republican that initially was opposed to marijuana, and that's because I was told growing up that if you smoked marijuana, you were going to end up dead in an alley. Well, as life progresses, I had my first child about 8 years ago, and she was born as a special needs child. And one of the things that was happening is she was having seizures every single day. She was having between 25 and 35 seizures a day, each of them lasting between 8 and 12 minutes. So I spent years with this beautiful little girl that was essentially non-responsive. Years with no eye contact, no smiles, no progression in her development. And then Arizona's medical marijuana law came along, and one of the qualifying conditions was for seizures. Naturally, that's something that I was battling, and I was on the pharmaceutical merry-go-round. That caught my attention, started researching it, and I ultimately ended up building a business to help one person, my daughter. That was it. Now, it's been a huge shift, change. I'll cut to the chase in the story there. She went from being non-responsive in a wheelchair and no quality of life. We were simply facilitating life. To today, she is out of a wheelchair. She's walking, she's laughing, she's running, she's playing, she's getting into things, she's engaging with her brother and sister. She's feeding herself, and she generally enjoys a very high quality of life. And that is simply and solely because of marijuana. Now, that's on the medical marijuana side, though. Now, I'm in the business now. And being in the business, you kind of get exposed to marijuana a lot. And the first thing that was so striking to me that I simply didn't understand prior was that prohibition has been an abject failure. By a show of hands in this room, how many of you people in this room think that prohibition works? Okay. Thank you. We've seen that it doesn't. It doesn't work. So my conclusion of this was simple, that this is not a matter of yes marijuana or no marijuana. Prohibition's been an abject failure. In Colorado, in 2015, they sold a combined $996 million of marijuana. You'd think, oh my Lord, everyone in Colorado must be high all the time. But that's not true either. They really didn't see usage rates go up. What we've done, or what Colorado has done, and what we're trying to do here in Arizona, is take a product and a substance that is out there today. It is easily and readily available to anybody that wants it. And we are saying this is a substance that's objectively safer than alcohol. We are better off taxing it and regulating it and sending those monies to our schools rather than the drug cartels and El Chapo. And so this is not a matter of, hey, I think everyone should go out and smoke a bunch of marijuana. No, but at the same time, I don't believe that people should receive felonies for consuming marijuana. I don't believe that they need to go to rehabilitation camp or re-education camp for consuming a little bit of marijuana.
All right, and we'll get to some more of those arguments from your side. But Mr. Montgomery, let's go to you. Can you talk about how you've become such a powerful advocate for the opposition to this, and what experiences have reinforced that for you?
In the position that I have, I get to see the other side of what happens when people become addicted to substances and what ultimately happens to them and their families. I've also got a personal experience of having a father who spent time in a federal penitentiary for being a drug trafficker. So I see that side of it too. And I know that the promises that are often made by the criminal organizations don't pan out. And over the last 6-8 years in being involved in various forms of public policy, I also saw how often special interest groups present misleading information to voters, like some of the information that was just shared with you, in order to take advantage of our initiative process. Mr. Holyoke owns 2 dispensaries and a cultivation site and stands to make millions. So this has gone beyond the admittedly understandable and laudatory efforts to address a condition that his daughter faced. And I don't begrudge him anything for wanting to be able to address that. But we're not talking about CBD oil sales now. We're talking about high-potency THC and edibles and a whole host of other manufactured products that goes well beyond just the medicinal application. And again, as Ms. Sanders said at the outset, this is about recreational use, not medicinal use. And so wanting to make sure that people have accurate information in order to be able to exercise their vote responsibly is the single biggest motivating factor. 4 years ago when I ran after my initial 2-year term, I also advocated against an effort to try to redraft and re-overhaul our entire primary system because I thought the arguments that were being presented just weren't fairly being presented or based on accurate information. And so Arizona voters were being told one thing, promised another, and there was no data to support it. And the same thing happened in this regard too. If voters are going to make a decision, I want them to make a decision with accurate information and being able to make a responsible decision that we need to have citizens in a constitutional republic make. I don't stand to make anything off of this. I'm a volunteer. I'm here on my own time. So there's no personal gain from this for me other than being a fellow Arizonan, wanting you to understand exactly what the consequences for making a choice to expand the medicinal market could have on individuals in our communities and current and future generations of youth.
So let's get more deep into the facts. Mr. Montgomery, can you give us basically your best argument for voting no? This is kind of what you usually give as your opening statement.
Look, this initiative is masquerading as a windfall for safe communities and education funding. Proposition 205 undermines local control, would be voter protected that prevents legislative changes for problems that develop. It would keep Arizona from being able to impose restrictions on driving while impaired by marijuana like we have for alcohol, increase risks of vehicle crashes and deaths, impact drug-free workplace policies, establishes new government bureaucracies with sweeping control different than how we regulate alcohol, and protects markets for current dispensary owners. Arizonans should simply vote no on Proposition 205. Even people in favor of marijuana legalization conclude Prop 205 is bad for Arizona and we should vote no. Just in the last week and a half, Professor Mark Kleiman, who supports marijuana legalization, concluded after a forum at ASU that Prop 205 is a bad idea and Arizona should vote no because of special interest protections without meaningful restrictions to protect public health. Are communities safer? Washington State saw marijuana-related traffic fatalities double. Colorado saw them increase 64%. And Oregon saw marijuana DUI arrests increase over 160%. Emergency room visits for children in Colorado who accidentally ate edibles, like gummy bears and other kid-friendly shapes, and candies that can contain 90% pure THC, shot up 600%. To deal with this public health disaster, Colorado outlawed the sale of edibles that children were eating. Arizona's Voter Protection Act will not let our legislature do that. And dispensary owners wrote into Prop 205 language that restricts regulations that have too great an impact on their businesses. Prop 205 will not let Arizona towns and counties opt out of recreational sales like they can in Colorado. And the cost to run the new Department of Marijuana and pay for operations of the Department of Revenue will not leave enough money for schools to make a difference. Even with optimistic estimates of revenue, it comes out to be about $30 per student the first year and $56 per student the second year. With the negative impacts to teen development and risks of addiction due to increased THC content, the costs to our youth are not worth the empty promise of money for their education. Vote no on Prop 205 and truly keep communities safe and protect education.
And Mr. Holyoke.
I didn't write anything down, so I'm not going to read it. What we have seen so far in this campaign, what we've seen decades of, is scare tactics and fear-mongering. Be afraid. Be very afraid. You know, Halloween's coming up. This is a common sense issue. And I ask people to be pragmatic. You don't have to want to consume marijuana to understand that taxing it and regulating it is better than leaving it to the black markets. In Arizona, the JLBC, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, which is essentially the finance or economic guys for our state legislature, their own data said that in Arizona we've got about 587,100 regular marijuana consumers in the state of Arizona. That's straight out of their report. Now, I find that actually kind of comical and funny because they survey this and they call people up and they say, have you committed a felony in the last 30 days? And shockingly, there are this number of people that say yes. So I don't know what the real number is, but I have a hard time believing that people say yes when they don't actually do that. We also arrest about 14,000 people a year in this state for simple marijuana possession. That's not trafficking, that's not distributing, it's not selling, it's simple possession. Now, I am not suggesting that our prisons are full of marijuana simple consumers. No, they get the opportunity to go to rehabilitation camp instead. Now, does that make sense? Does an adult who consumes marijuana in a responsible manner, do they need to go to rehabilitation camp or have the option of a felony? So this is a pragmatic argument. The choice that's in front of us isn't yes marijuana or no marijuana, or it's not even marijuana's good or marijuana's bad. I think all of those options are moot. They simply don't exist because marijuana is here. That's a fact. Prohibition's been an abject failure. The choice that we have is, are we going to tax and regulate marijuana and send those dollars to our schools? Or are we going to keep it illegal for the enrichment of criminal drug dealers and cartels? That's the only option that we have. And that's the option that you're faced with as voters.
So let's go a little deeper and look at 3 themes: public safety and criminal justice, public health, and business taxes, the implementation of this. Let's start with you, Mr. Holyoke. Let's go to this question of arrests and public safety and the driving under the influence. What would this proposition do to law enforcement's ability to arrest or charge people with driving under the influence? And how does today's law, how would that be the same or different if this proposition passes?
I like to read from the direct text language. I assume that everyone in this room is capable of reading as well. And I encourage all of you to read the initiative, please. You don't have to believe anything that I say or anything that the county prosecutor says. Read it for yourself. But I'm just going to read this. This is simple. This chapter does not authorize any person to engage in, nor does it prevent the imposition of any civil, criminal, or other penalty on a person for, and then it lists a bunch of things. Number 1, operating, navigating, or being in actual physical control of any motor vehicle, train, aircraft, motor boat, or motorized form of transport or machinery while impaired by marijuana or marijuana products. Now, here's where the county attorney takes exception with that, and he says, that's too cute by half. I think that's his phrase. Back here in a different section, it says, a person may not be penalized by the state for an action taken while under the influence of marijuana or a marijuana product solely is an operative word, because of the presence of metabolites or components of marijuana in the person's body or in the urine, blood, saliva, hair, tissue, or fluid of the person's body. So, a person gets into a vehicle and they're impaired by marijuana. They should get a DUI for that. We don't support driving under the influence of any substance, whether it's over the counter, legal, illegal, or I don't care what it is. If you're driving impaired, you should be charged with that. This allows for that. It says it explicitly. Solely is an A plus B action. Getting in a vehicle and driving while high is A plus B. This exception does not apply to that.
Mr. Montgomery, you've said that this does tie the hands of law enforcement. Can you explain that view?
Sure. And these are cases that I first prosecuted when I joined the Maricopa County Attorney's Office in my first major crimes assignment. So I know how these laws actually work when you try to apply them and hold people accountable for violating them. And when you put in an initiative and you state clearly that you may not use certain types of evidence, period. If this isn't going to have any effect, then the drafters of this initiative wasted ink and wasted paper to do it. Courts will give effect to words in initiatives. Courts will give effect to all of the words that are put into a statute. So when you hear that the state may not impose a penalty for an action taken while under the influence of marijuana or a marijuana product based solely on the presence of metabolites or a marijuana component in the blood, it means I can't rely on that evidence solely like I can for alcohol. I mean, if you're above a .08, you're presumed impaired, and I can prosecute you to keep our roads safe. We can't have a per se limit for marijuana because that would be evidence based solely on the presence of active metabolites within the blood. We don't have the situation where people are being charged for having inactive metabolites present in the blood, because the Arizona Supreme Court ruled 2 years ago that you can't do that. Where does this situation also present the greatest concern for public safety? Well, I shared with you earlier that Washington State saw a doubling of the number of marijuana-related fatalities they had, and Colorado saw a 64% increase. So, yeah, Halloween's coming up, but this initiative is all trick and no treat, because if that were to happen in Colorado, then I can't use the evidence of that impairment to charge the reckless behavior to hold the homicide perpetrator accountable if all I have is solely what is in their blood? And under what circumstance could that occur? The driver is rendered unconscious. They make no statements to police. They do not do field sobriety tests. They do not cooperate with a drug recognition expert. All I have is what is in their blood. Today, if that's alcohol, I can successfully prosecute. If it's marijuana, I can't if this were to pass.
And we can go into a lot more detail on this, but I'd like to move through these three themes and then get to your questions, because I'm sure that we've got more specifics that you all want to know. So let's go on to public health. And we'll start with you, Mr. Montgomery. Proponents of this say that you can't overdose from marijuana and it's safer than other intoxicants. If people are already using marijuana, aren't we already living with the health effects of this drug?
Well, a couple of things. When you say safer than, relative in what sense? Fewer people right now, because marijuana is illegal, are using at the same levels or engaging in the same conduct as people who ingest alcohol, because that is legal and it's regulated. We know from looking at some of the experiences of individuals in Colorado that people have died from ingesting one marijuana edible. I haven't heard of anybody ever dying from drinking one beer. Also compare and contrast that if you drink one beer and you have a full meal, your body will metabolize that, and within an hour, you're not impaired at all. Scientifically, you're not impaired at all. But with the ingestion of an edible, you might still be impaired an hour or 2 hours later. In fact, even proponents for marijuana in their safe use campaign will tell people if you ingest an edible, don't drive the rest of the day. That doesn't occur with alcohol. And in terms of other public safety problems that we'll have, if you ever get past the point where there is money available for education, there's a carve-out for another 20% for programs to educate the public about the relative harms of marijuana. So which is it? Is it just like the initiative says that we're going to remove marijuana from the illegal market and then admits that we may issue more licenses because it's desirable to reduce the illicit market? After last week, proponents for this initiative admitted that it won't get rid of the illegal black market. So is this a case where really marijuana is harmless, but we're going to spend money to teach people about the harms? The thing you have to keep in mind is that as you have increased availability and increased usage, we will see the increased consequences and the increased harms. We already know from our Arizona Youth Survey that more teens were starting to get their marijuana from medical marijuana card holders as that percentage of user and qualified patient increased.
Mr. Holyoke, why don't you address the public health question? Mr. Montgomery has warned that usage might go up among youth. Also, opponents have brought up concerns about the potency of marijuana products, the candies that might be attractive to children or animals. Can you make the case for why marijuana is the safer option and these concerns that opponents have?
Will you talk about what the levels of opioids that you can find in people's blood are now and how you do that?
I'm going to leave it up
And
to
we'll
the
take
moderator.
questions from the audience later. Thanks.
Sorry.
So, health concerns. I find that you have extremes on both ends of the arguments. There are marijuana proponents out there that say that marijuana is safe for babies and pregnant women and everybody in between, and I find that argument to be ridiculous. That's not true. There are the anti-marijuana prohibitionists out there that say if you eat an edible, you could die, like you just heard. I find that also to be not true. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Generally, marijuana is non-toxic to the body. It rarely causes problems. That doesn't mean that problems never occur. Sometimes they do. When we look at alcohol, for example, alcohol has an addiction rate that's at about 15% of regular alcohol consumers are clinically defined as alcoholics. When we look at marijuana, the rates of addiction are less than half of that for alcohol. So that's saying, yes, some people have a problem with this. But clearly, prohibition has done nothing to stop that from occurring. But I think that what should also be part of the conversation is individual freedom and individual responsibility. You see, because I'm one of those crazy right-wing Republicans that still believes in individual freedom and individual responsibility. And that I don't need a nanny state government coming to me and saying, you know what, alcohol, you can have that, and it's clearly scientifically more dangerous. But this one over here, we don't like that one, so you can't have that one. Where's the personal responsibility on these issues? I think that absolutely needs to be a part of this discussion. And furthermore, what are the penalties for disobeying your masters? In this state, it's a felony. I find that to be offensive.
And let's go to our third theme, and we're going to make these answers short so we can move to questions. Mr. Holyoke, can you address in terms of the business and taxation and implementation of this? And opponents have said that this proposition makes it very difficult for the legislature to make tweaks to the law to improve it. How do we, what improvement can be done, and what about this concern that it will be very difficult?
So I think that the first thing that people need to understand is kind of how this lawmaking works and what it actually looks like and functions when after implementation. So the law itself is what we call statute. That's essentially, think of a body, that's the skeleton. And then there's a rules-making process that fills out the flesh of that body. They're both equally important, but that skeleton is essentially fixed. So the rules-making process actually can address many, many of these things that they've done through the legislative process in Colorado. And frankly, we built this and we drafted this with that very intent in place because we expect that commission to do exactly that and to be able to make tweaks and changes as needed. Now, talk about the difficulties of changing this, that's absolutely correct. In Arizona, we have what's called the Voter Protection Act, which was passed in 1998 in direct response to marijuana from 1996. Many of us don't remember that in 1996, Arizona passed the medical marijuana law. The very next legislative session, the legislature came in and said, hey voters, you're too stupid. We're going to go ahead and we're going to reverse that. So the backer of that initial medical marijuana law was John Sperling, founder of University of Phoenix. So he was kind of upset about that. So the next opportunity, which was 1998, he passed or put on the ballot Proposition 105, otherwise known as the Voter Protection Act, that says that the state legislature cannot come in and make these changes. The Voter Protection Act exists solely and only because of marijuana. And to give further example of that, as we sit here today, right now, the county attorney has a pending case in front of the Arizona Appellate Court in an effort to overturn the medical marijuana law as if you had never voted on it. And that's why these things are so important.
And Mr. Montgomery, let's ask a different question, and this is on the locations of dispensaries if this proposition were passed. You've been critical that medical dispensaries would have the first crack at getting a license to distribute recreational marijuana. But wouldn't you, as somebody who's concerned about the public safety and public health effects, want as few locations of dispensaries as possible? And can you just talk about that concern about the location of these businesses?
Sure. Well, if a town or a city currently has a dispensary, they cannot limit the number of retail stores to less than the number of dispensaries they currently have. And it's not a conservative Republican principle to use the ballot box in an act of crony capitalism. This wouldn't pass muster if the legislature was trying to write legislation to protect just a small number of businesses. So trying to claim that somehow it's conservative to abuse the initiative process to protect your own business is laughable. The The other thing you've got to realize is that it only limits the number of the number of retail stores for the first 4 years, and then after that, the Marijuana Commission, which is stacked with industry insiders, can go ahead and begin to issue additional licenses if there are such excuses as, well, we want more in rural areas, or it's desirable to limit the illicit market. So the acknowledgement that the black market will continue can actually serve as a basis for issuing more licenses. And there is no restriction on the additional licenses that can be issued. There are no specific guidelines within the statute to direct the actions of the Marijuana Commission in doing that. The other thing you got to realize too with that Voter Protection Act is that one provision addressing penalties that minimizes the risks of butane hash oil and makes it the lowest level felony that we have within the state also makes it a petty offense for youth access, for using a fake ID to buy marijuana or soliciting somebody else to buy marijuana. Those remain criminal misdemeanors in Colorado. And at the end of it, the provision states that the legislature may eliminate or reduce those penalties. So that, in conjunction with the Voter Protection Act, is going to create an environment in which youth are being told very different things. That if you can find that retail business and you can use a fake ID, and this isn't limited to the 20 or 19-year-old. There is no age limit on that, where there's a cutoff. So the number of retail stores we start with is not the number that will be limited to over time. And the access that youth could have to that is treated as a petty offense. And the Voter Protection Act won't allow the legislature to make any changes. Colorado, over the last 4 years, every year 20 bills are going through that legislature trying to fix the problems they've got. We won't be able to do that.
All right, and so let's give your really brief closing statement, just a few seconds, and then we'll move to audience questions. Mr. Montgomery, please give us your most succinct argument to vote no.
Sure. We already have medicinal access for those who need it. The lawsuit before the Court of Appeals is to resolve the ongoing conflict between state and federal law, which any conservative Republican would appreciate because we are a nation of laws and not of dispensary owners. The other thing we need to keep in mind, too, is that if we want to look at our national drug policy, and I'm not going to use 1930s rhetoric for 21st century problems, but over 50% of Americans regularly use alcohol. It's 12 years and older, regularly use alcohol, a legal regulated product. 25% of Americans aged 12 and older regularly use tobacco, a legal regulated product. Only 10% of Americans are using illicit drugs. If we were talking about any other type of activity, we would say that is actually a successful national policy because for other behaviors that we know have societal costs,
and we've been able
to limit it at 5 and 2.5 times.
We're going to have to move on to the closing argument for Mr. Holyoke.
I'm not going to ask how many people in this room currently consume cannabis, but I will ask the question, if marijuana becomes legal and you don't consume marijuana today, how many of you would be inclined to start using marijuana after the law passes? Oh, there's one. Couple? All right. John Hickenlooper, the governor of Colorado, was a staunch opponent to Amendment 64. He said if he could wave a magic wand and make it go away, he would have. He said that right after the election. More recently, he made this statement. The people who used to be smoking it are still smoking it. They're now just paying taxes. The people who didn't smoke it still aren't. We haven't seen a spike. But I think there's a real expectation from people even that don't smoke it. You shouldn't go to jail, and it isn't that much worse than whiskey or beer. The choice is tax and regulate money for schools, or keep it illegal, send people with criminal records or to rehabilitation camp, and send the money to El Chapo and the Mexican cartels. This is a pragmatic choice, whether you're for it or against it. Thank you.
All right, so if you've got any more questions, feel free to hand them to Linda, who's going to collect them and bring them up. But we've got a bunch already. So, Mr. Montgomery, you describe increases in marijuana deaths and hospitalizations in percentages. What are the actual number of incidents of both?
I think in the first year for Colorado, with 32 deaths to 64 deaths related to marijuana. The numbers in Washington, I'm the raw numbers off the top of my head, but they saw a similar increase in Colorado with those raw numbers to get to the 64%. So you had a larger number going from 14 to 15 of the 64. Dangerous to do math in public. You probably had about another 20 to 30 maybe. But when you consider then that but for legalizing, you wouldn't have had that increase, even 10 are problematic. I mean, Colorado would have seen an even greater reduction in their traffic fatalities if you hadn't seen the market increase in the marijuana fatalities.
Mr. Holyoke, there are approximately 15,000 liquor licenses in Arizona with less than 20 liquor regulators. Many millions of dollars are generated by this licensing activity. Very little go to regulation. With Prop 205, of the millions generated, how much will go to regulation?
Lots of different people can come up with lots of different numbers. I'm going to choose to use the state legislature's analysis on that, and they estimate this at about $8.6 million in cost to administer the program. I can come up with lots of different numbers, as many people can, so I'm simply trying to point to an unbiased third-party source of our state legislature. About $8.6 million would be the cost of administration.
And Mr. Montgomery, what is the argument that suggests that drug-free workplace procedures would be hampered? Why would working while high be harder to stop than working while drunk?
Well, because if you go into work drunk, your employer can fire you. There's no statutory right to use alcohol. This initiative will create a statutory right to use marijuana. It also will hamstring business owners because while it purports to create or to allow business owners to continue with workplace policies to restrict possession and consumption, it doesn't say anything about use off-site. And the initiative also states that it doesn't authorize anybody to engage in conduct that would constitute negligence or professional malpractice. Therefore, when you read all three of these sections together, which is exactly what a court would do, you see that you have a right to use, which the employer cannot prohibit off of the workplace, and the employer then can only take action to penalize you at the workplace if you engage in something that's negligent or malpractice. So anything short of that, or short of an employer being able to prove that's what you were engaged in, they're not going to be able to do anything. At an absolute minimum, best case world, they better have a really good law firm on retainer because that's going to get litigated. And it's different than Colorado that has protections for employers, different than this initiative.
Right, let's have Mr. Holyoke respond, and then Ashley, would you be able to tell us a little bit about how workplace regulations have worked in Colorado after Mr. Holyoke answers?
I'm going to keep this really short because I think it's really simple. I'll just read directly from the initiative itself. This chapter does not require an employer to allow or accommodate the possession or consumption of marijuana or marijuana products in the workplace and does not affect the ability of employers to enact and enforce workplace policies restricting the consumption of marijuana products by employees. If an employer wants to maintain a zero tolerance policy, they're certainly free to do that, and I support their ability to do that.
And how about in Colorado? What has your experience been with workplace issues?
Yeah. Our Amendment 64 said something to the effect that this amendment shall not interfere with our employers' rights to maintain a drug-free workforce. So, my direct experience with our city employees has been that it hasn't had an impact one way or the other. So we have not seen excessive marijuana use in our workforce since legalization.
All right. Mr. Holyoke, can you talk about how many dollars have been currently allocated for youth education and prevention for alcohol use? And then, so this is for alcohol use. Can you also talk about prevention and education for marijuana use?
I cannot speak to the alcohol numbers. I have absolutely no idea. But once again, I like to read from the initiative, so I can just read from it. It says, quote, 20%, and we're talking about the net proceeds, so after the cost of the administration of the department. And so it's 80% to education, 20% here to the healthcare side. 20% to the Arizona Department of Health Services for the program established by Title 36, Section 1161, including public education campaigns regarding the relative harms of alcohol, marijuana, and other substances. We think that it's important to educate young folks away from using marijuana and all substances. In no way, shape, or form do we condone teenagers consuming marijuana. This is an adult substance just like alcohol.
Mr. Montgomery, what about this question? Our state is different than others that have approved this because we're so close to the border. What should we be considering given our proximity to the border?
Well, we should consider the fact that in Colorado, which is one state away, over the last couple of months, they've had law enforcement operations taking down grow operations from foreign nationals from Cuba, China, Vietnam, Laos, and Mexico. And so us being close to the border, then, we're an even more enticing target to try to integrate into what would appear to be a legal grow market. And keep in mind that this initiative gives current dispensary owners the highest tier license for cultivation, which allows them to grow an unlimited amount of marijuana. So how law enforcement in moving in any particular area without being able to use anymore, just the odor or sight of marijuana as probable cause to investigate, are going to be able to tell which acreage belongs to a dispensary owner and which acreage happens to be a different group of individuals or a local cartel operation from engaging in that. And part of the problem with that too is that this initiative gives the Department of Marijuana exclusive authority to investigate licensees and those unlicensed who transfer anything of marijuana for value. So you're going to have to increase the regulatory overhead for the Department of Marijuana much more than the Department of Health Safety that $8.6 million was estimated. And it's not even going to be remotely similar to what the Department of Liquor has. They've got 60 sworn officers. You're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, to be able to carry out all this regulatory work, which is going to shrink up and dry up all those monies that are supposedly going to be available for education.
Mr. Holyoke, would you like to respond?
I don't even know where to start on this stuff. I mean, the idea that we should try to all right, let's look at the economics of Colorado. 2015, they sold $996 million worth of marijuana in that state, taxed and regulated. That's a simple fact. But the idea now that drug cartels are thriving just doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think that there is an argument here because when we look at, we're going from a transition from a black market to a white market. This occurred with the end of alcohol prohibition as well. The Al Capones of the world did not go away on day one. There was a transition going from illegal to legal. We're seeing that in many of the states today. But just like the end of alcohol prohibition, today we don't see the Miller Lite and Coors Light cartels shooting it out in our streets. So is the end of marijuana prohibition going to cause these illegal operators to go away with the stroke of a pen? No, absolutely not. There is a transition period there where they are phased out, and it's going to take a couple of years to get there. I don't know exactly how long that's going to take, but just like alcohol prohibition, it happened. This is something really interesting too. I got a call from a guy that lives up on the Canadian border. And this guy's, he's an older guy, and he says, back in when I was a young man, I was told stories about the bootleggers coming across the Canadian border, and the Canadian border was just like the Mexican border is today, with the alcohol coming through. He says, we don't see that anymore. Now we're all friends because we don't have this conflict. So much of what we saw with the end of alcohol prohibition, we will see with the end of marijuana prohibition.
Let's, Ms. Kilroy, Colorado, you said, has seen the transporting of marijuana across state lines. Can you talk about what the legalization has done to affect what might be the black market, and also how your law enforcement identify between what are legitimate grow operations and what are illegitimate? Uh-oh.
Enforcement officers use here within DPD, Denver Police Department, is that it's hard to find And what we are seeing is, organized drug trafficking organizations that are, as the officers will say, hiding in plain sight. Because it is difficult for our officers to know. It used to be years ago, if they saw a warehouse and they smelled marijuana, they knew they could get a warrant and go in because it was illegal. But now, because they could be legal if they had a license, it is difficult for the officers to know whether or not they're legal and to get a license and to get a warrant. So we have to hire about 14 additional officers over the last 2 years. We now have a marijuana unit, and I think now they're running with 2 teams. We have officers who work very closely with me and my team, officers who are embedded sort of in excise and licenses and work with the inspectors to go out on the inspections so they can be sure they're checking licenses and make sure these individuals are licensed, or if they are even out of compliance, and how do they get back into compliance so they remain licensed. But it definitely has been a problem, and even though I say that marijuana-related crime has still remained at about that 2%, our officers, our DEA, our DOJ is saying that they are seeing more activity related to marijuana than before legalization, but we're just not quite seeing it in those crime numbers like we would have anticipated we would have.
Much like the Voter Protection Act was passed in 1998, we looked at this and we said we don't trust legislators to actually give money to education. So we didn't put the money towards the general fund. It's earmarked. They don't have a choice. They don't get to go raid those funds. They don't get to make that decision. We as the voters are making that decision to send this money to education, and the state legislators don't get a chance to touch it.
Mr. Montgomery, if we pass Prop 205, what happens if a new federal administration, we're electing a new president in November, decides to enforce federal marijuana laws? Where will we be then?
I'll still be here, but Mr. Holyoke will have to get a really good criminal defense attorney. What could wind up happening too is that all of the different states that have tried to plan their economies around either taxes from medicinal sales or from recreational sales are going to have to figure out a different way to deal with whatever money they thought that they were going to be making, because the next administration can come in, and just as they did with Arizona when it came to efforts to uphold or support federal immigration law, they can come in and say that all of these laws are in violation of the Supremacy Clause and strike them all down. We've already seen in some states at the district court level where people tried to state that their conduct was protected by state law and that federal asset forfeiture actions were unlawful. They lost every single one of them. So it really is just the change of an administration where people take their oath seriously. That could be a day and night change.
Do you want to respond?
I'd be glad to. The county attorney is absolutely correct. What I do is federally illegal. I'm pretty sure that I'm on TV a lot, so they know who I am. I'm not losing any sleep over it. But we have 25 states right now that have laws in violation of federal law regarding marijuana. We have 4 states that currently have adult use laws, including the District of Columbia and our very own capital has legalized marijuana. So if the federal government wants to come do this, they would be telling more than half of the American population, hey, all of you states' rights, 10th Amendment type people, we don't care, we're wiping that out. My opinion, and not only my opinion, but also I have risked, I suppose, my personal freedom on this issue, is that horse has left the barn. But if that's a concern for you, then simply don't be in the marijuana industry. I think it's pretty simple.
Mr. Montgomery, can you speak to the comment that Mr. Holyoke made that you are working to overturn the law that legalizes medical marijuana? I believe this is not current, but that you had some involvement before. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, there was a group that wanted to cite a dispensary. Is it?
Just bring it closer.
No.
Oh.
I can speak louder. Everybody at the back hear me? a group wanted to site a dispensary on a county island, which left it within exclusive county zoning authority. And my advice to county employees was that they couldn't further the violation of federal law, which Mr. Holyoke has admitted these laws are in violation of. My oath of office requires me to uphold both the U.S. Constitution and the constitutional laws of the state of Arizona. So what I did was I worked with the attorney for the group that wanted to site that medical marijuana dispensary and told him that I'd help him file the lawsuit, quickly provided him with a letter stating why we weren't going to be able to process the application, and threw it into the courts. That's what we do in this country when there is a dispute over which law controls. Elected officials don't just do what they want to do. You got to follow it in a process where there is a clear conflict between federal and state law. You litigate it in court. So it's currently before the Arizona Court of Appeals addressing the issues related to the authority of a county to pass zoning law, as well as the issue of whether or not Arizona can, in fact, have an affirmative program providing for marijuana to individuals in violation of federal law. So that's where it is. I was sued. I didn't bring the suit myself, and it's before the Court of Appeals to resolve a state-federal law conflict.
Mr. Holyoke, let's move on to this question. What is your opinion of the impact of decriminalization of marijuana on policing, specifically police and community relations? Do you see an impact that this law could bring as we see turmoil on that front?
We have turmoil in this country regarding police and community interaction right now. That's unfortunate, and there are no clear-cut good guys and bad guys on either side. There are very good people on both sides of that argument, and there are people that are doing the wrong things on both sides of that argument. But marijuana ultimately creates more conflict. It's the most commonly used illegal substance in this country. And unfortunately, when we look at the racial impacts of that, we know that blacks, whites, and Latinos all consume marijuana at about the same exact rates. That's a simple fact. But blacks and Latinos are about 4 times more likely to be arrested and charged and face criminal conviction for the exact same thing. Now, I'm not here to explain why. I don't know the whys of that, but we know that that's a simple fact. What does this do? Certainly it eliminates and reduces the opportunity for some negative conflict, and it reduces the opportunity for the discrimination of people of color.
We're going to have to leave it there. Unfortunately, I'm sure we all have more questions, but there's one last question.
I just need to say I disagree.
All right, thank you. And this is something I have no idea, but Mr. Holyoke, since you're a dispensary owner, maybe you can help. Which is better for watching a political debate, Kanga Kush or After School Special?
Is after school special? I don't know what that is. I've never heard of that.
Well, then we don't have an answer.
Yeah,
You'll have to find out.
I think we all, to be able to watch these debates on a go-forward basis, we all need a little bit of marijuana to chill out on this one.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Ms. Kilroy for joining us.